Hello everybody, my name is Jad Welcome to another MLB 9 24 video. In today's video, I want to talk to you guys today about this video. Now, I promised you guys this video a couple weeks ago, a little while ago at this point, but I wanted to get this video done today. So, we are going to be watching the video about, from 9 Pros about ranked play hacking. Now, I agree with some of the things he says. I disagree with some of the things he says. I've watched this video already, so this is not like a first-time reaction thing or anything. I've kind of collected my thoughts a little bit. So we'll go through it. I'll cut out some parts of it, depending on whether or not I think that like anything needs to be commented on. Some things I'm kind of like, no, this doesn't really have a lot to do with what's going on, in my opinion. But this is just my opinion. This is just, you know, from myself working as like I do programming. Like I kind of have a general idea of how things are working behind the scenes. So with that being said, let's get into the video today, and I hope you guys enjoy. Yeah, everybody's excited about the fact that I got face cam up here today, probably. Which is weird because I already have face cam videos on my channel, but...
Welcome, everybody. This is a video I've been meaning to make for quite a while, but in response to a thread that's been going on around Reddit, I figured it is finally time to do this because every period of time, be it a year, 6 months, whatever, somebody starts screaming that there's hacking going on. And on Reddit, I have taken a very hard stance that there's absolutely not something going on. And I wanted to back up what I was saying.
So actually, I want to start right from the beginning. We need to differentiate between a couple of words here. So there's different words here. There's hacking, there's cheating, there's, you know, cracking. There's like a couple different words here. I don't really think they're like hacking into the database. Like that's kind of what I would imagine. Like I feel like they're breaching the game in some way. It's a little bit of kind of like there's not really a difference there, but you know, you could describe it a little bit more accurately in my opinion. I don't think it's hacking. I think that they're literally just manipulating. They're manipulating data streams essentially is what my thoughts are.
And then
that's not really hacking. That's more just like, you know, intercepting data and
we're at a stage now where it's
modifying packets.
Almost irrefutable what we're seeing in results. So let's delve into the topic of the game, how it plays out, security and hacking and possible attacks on this, and what's viable and what's not.
Let's do it. Okay, right off the bat, number one, Com2 is not stupid. Now look, maybe I'm a little skeptical here. I would tend to agree with this point though.
So before we get into this, let me just start off by stating that
what we've seen is that the devs are rather lazy in a lot of their conventions, in the sense that a lot of times they quite literally just copy and paste things from previous events. And you kind of notice these things because you'll see them use the same words, or like they'll introduce news posts with old photos. Or they'll release events, and like there will be vulnerabilities in the events that just like, for example, we had Diamond Gate when for some reason nobody noticed that there was no limit on the number of diamond packs you could obtain. Like stuff like that just shows a lack of attention to detail, no testing, either nobody cared, or that there isn't anybody there with a security conscious point of view. So I personally think that the security of this application is outsourced, and that the main security features that we are looking at here today are not necessarily their security, if that makes sense. Like, they're probably using proprietary security, they're probably using proprietary encryption, they're using a proprietary obfuscation on the APK file so that way you can't break into it, or in theory you can't break into it. I would imagine that like 95% of the stupid mistakes are more on a surface level of poor coding or poor management, or they just don't have the employees that we think they do, stuff like that. But I think that like 95% of the issues are surface level and therefore are not necessarily what we're looking at here. So like, you know, all of the errors and spaghetti code and stuff like that, like we can laugh at that stuff, but it doesn't really necessarily give you a pathway to break into their application and necessarily cheat at the game, in my opinion. I think that like you'll see bugs and stuff like that, but it will not let you get through that firewall because there's supposed to be like a proprietary level of security there on all Android applications at this point, especially any of them that offer payment applications like this one. Like I'm fairly certain that there is a standardized level of security if you are going to be on the App Store and accepting payments that you will have to pass at least some level of security in order to keep customers safe. And the App Store and the iTunes Store as well.
Am not an expert on the subject of security and hacking. I have spent some time working within the security space, so I do know enough to be dangerous. There are only some of these things
I'm feeling dangerous today.
But actually doing some of these things myself is not necessarily within my capabilities, but I do know what I'm talking about. So going into this whole thing, there's some stipulations that I am assuming about this that, if proven to be false, will break down a little.
I definitely don't have enough water for this at all. I'm gonna have to like pause the video and get up.
Come is not stupid. They've produced a good game. I'm assuming they know how to architect things fairly well. That they are architecting around standard patterns that are used for scalable applications and distributed applications, such as this. Distributed meaning there's a phone app that interacts with servers.
Yep.
That they are.
But again, that's probably not even their creation. I mean, they probably didn't even write the socket software that this game uses. It's probably quite literally just they wrote the code that interacts with the sockets, and they probably are the ones that are not responsible for creating the system that communicates with the server. That's probably not even theirs. But this is not uncommon. This is just the way things are nowadays. You get a secure system, and you just basically, everyone just black boxes off of it. It's a proprietary, it's step by step, so that way that increases the level of security in the game.
Servers are deployed on a server farm, and that server farm has innate and basic protections built into it.
Yes.
As is typical.
Well, of course, that's on a server farm. I mean, you're quite literally logging in to this device and this game with your Google account. I mean, if it was possible to attack it, then I think Google has some sort of system that requires you to abide by certain security requirements before they allow you to on their platform. Because essentially, the last thing Google wants is a backdoor into their platform.
With any type of cloud-based computing, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, whatever. And finally, and this is a big one, standard encryption or message protection is being used. And
they have to be using it. There's no way it's 2024 if you're not using encryption. And I know what you're saying out there is like, oh, they have to be using encryption. Like, I have quite literally seen medical facilities that store patient information in plain text. So it is not outside the realm of possibility that they do not use encryption. However, I have seen firsthand that they do use encryption. Okay, like I have, like, just out of curiosity to see how games work nowadays, I've looked at the APK files. The APK file it does have proprietary protection on it that requires you to essentially deobfuscate the APK. Like, unless you have their key, you can't really go snooping in their files at all. So they do use a level of encryption there. I would imagine that the data that's sent to the server is also encrypted because it's run through HTTPS protocols. So I would like to believe that is encrypted, but you know, I have not been able to inspect packets. I will get back to that later.
Get into a little bit about what that means a little bit later.
Sounds like everybody's home these days.
Let's move on from here. First, before
how are we doing? It's gonna be an hour-long video.
And attack vectors and these types of things. There's some things we need to accept and understand about the game that impact its ability to be hacked or manipulated. First, when you have a game that has interactive modes such as clutch, play, arcade, these types of things, that involves the phone. You're interacting with the phone. You're causing some types.
We've seen this before, by the way. I don't know if anybody remembers this, but there was quite a lot of people that in the past actually were banned off of the game for speed hacking, essentially, because they were essentially using, I think, a speed tool to like slow down the game's execution and actually make it easier to get contact with in arcade mode, for instance. And I remember also seeing a lot of people like pause buffer arcade mode, so they had to like remove that feature. Like, you can no longer pause the game in arcade mode anymore because of that feature, because it would actually lag the game out.
Some types of effects that the phone has to record and has to communicate back to the server.
And PvP doesn't work anyway. As we've seen, it just disconnects you half the time. It doesn't even work anyway.
Those are imminently more hackable.
Like, their one attempt to make a live mode just doesn't work.
Such as ranked play, staged games, and friendly, in which you fire and forget, and you have no ability to perform subs in the middle of the game, you have no ability to do manual like at bats, any of these types of things, you have no agency over the course of the game.
Yeah.
Those are non-interactive modes, and those are a different level.
This might be weird to say, but I feel like the non-interactive modes are more vulnerable than the interactive modes. I feel like the interactive modes are much more difficult to, do anything specifically difficult, like anything bad with, essentially, because the game is in constant communication with you in interactive modes. So the game is constantly verifying information, and if anything is wrong, the game will just kick you out at that point. Like if you, like I've seen games in the past where, for instance, if you send a packet of data and like the server doesn't get a response for a certain amount of time, it will just tell you like timed out and will just kick you. So I've done this in the past with some games, and it's been fun to I like to like disassemble things. I like to see how things work. So in this interactive game modes, the game will just kick you out if there's if you just go past the keep alive time. So I feel like that it's more difficult to actually do anything with those game modes because the server is constantly hounding you for information. And if you send the server information that doesn't match what it thinks it's going on, then it will just kick you out, and then you just kind of lose your advantage that you think you're going to gain. The non-interactive modes, I feel like that because that there is only like you said, the fire and forget thing, that is the moment when you can manipulate the game at that point. There is one critical point of failure there.
Of how difficult it would be to actually hack those. So you might have heard me say statements that ranked play, there's no way that it's being hacked, it's virtually impossible. Let's get into why that is. So in summary, more interactivity, the greater the chances are that something is going to be hacked or that it could be hacked.
Yeah, I actually think, like I said, I think it's honestly the opposite because I think ranked has a single point of failure, and it's exceptionally, I can quite literally compare it to something that I've done in the past, and I'll explain it when we get there.
So the next important thing to understand.
This is a really interesting thing. I've had this theory for 2 years now at this point. I think anybody who's watched my videos knows that I've talked about this in the past, but this is absolutely the case. But I'm not sure if the video quite literally discusses specifically my thoughts on it, but we'll try.
Games are processed and how the results are generated by Com2 and the servers and then recorded. And that is, the game outcomes are actually predictable. Not by us.
Yes, that's a true fact. However, the game outcome is predictable. True fact. I will demonstrate this, but I would like to say that it is a little bit more difficult than you would imagine. Saying that the game outcomes are predictable is great, but however, he even puts a caveat, says, if you own the formulas. We don't know the formulas. We have no idea what the formulas are. We'll have no idea to know what the formulas are. Unless we are inside that room that made the game, we'll never know the formulas, because it's a black box.
But by Com2, based on knowing their own formulas, they're going to operate largely like a spreadsheet. So if you can imagine this small example that I put there on the right, if you know what the spreadsheet calculations are going to do, you can always predict the output. So in this case, with a 5, I always know it's going to come out to 305. If I put in a 10, I always know it's going to come out to 310.
Yeah.
Right? Because we know the formulas. And I can take that formula and I can give it to somebody else and give them a 5, and I know that they're going to come out with 305. This is very much the same as it is with this game. The only difference being with this game, the input value is a random number. And from that random number, from the random number generator, RNG, everything else is determined. Okay? So, what that enables Com2 to do is have one value that they can build, a random number, they can feed it into the game engine, and they can come up with a consistent result every time. They can feed that same random number to you, and you can generate the same results using the same formulas and find the exact same outcome that they did from their calculations. So,
he touches on it, but when people talk about random number generators in computers, it is different than random numbers. Random number generators are pseudo-random number generators. We do not currently possess the ability in computers to generate true randomness. It is essentially a long table of numbers that is meant to sort of give you the feeling of randomness. But here's the problem that I will have with this. It's just that when we talk about how game outcomes are predictable if you own the formulas, they could, for all we know, be using a proprietary random number generator. You can, like, every programming language basically has different ways that they achieve randomness. You could be honestly using a company's proprietary random number generating software, which does things differently than any other random number generating software. It essentially is a table of numbers that is meant to give you the feeling of randomness, but it is not truly random. It is predictable. However, like I said, companies like might be using their own in-house random number generator that we don't even have access to. So it may be predictable. Yes, it is a predictable outcome. If you know the inputs, you know you can get the same outputs every single time. But that's the case with pseudo-random number generators. But it is unfortunately, like I said, I use this a lot, and this is something that is useful when you learn programming languages, is that it's a black box philosophy. You don't want to know what's going on inside the black box, but you want to know the ways to interact with it, and it will give you back the same or the desired output, essentially. But you do not want to know what's inside the black box, because it works, don't touch it, and you don't have to really care about it. And that's a security feature.
What proof do we have of this? How do we know this is actually happening? First of all, if you've initiated a ranked play game and your phone has aborted for some reason, or you've shut it down or whatever, at that stage the random number has been generated, or the seed has been generated, and it's already been fed to your phone. So when you power back up your phone's going to know, oh, I had a game in process.
Mm-hmm. It's going to redo it. It's going to replay the whole game again.
Try and shut that down, the outcome will always
it will never
be
change.
the same.
Yes.
Because the random number is always the same.
Yes, it will always do the same exact thing. And I can give you guys a quick example of this, for instance, about how you can manipulate random number generators. So, in my theory, the way that I think the game achieves this is essentially when you hit the play button, the game seeds the random number generator using the current time in milliseconds of your phone. You can basically create like in Java, it's system.currentTime milliseconds. It shows you the number of milliseconds that have elapsed from January 1st, 1970 at midnight, essentially the beginning of Unix time. And that's how you can keep track of the current time in milliseconds. And I think what it does is it seeds the random number generator using that number. And so that way, all you have to do is when you go to replay the game says, okay, when did the game begin in milliseconds? And then the game feeds that number into the random number generator. And then it just basically runs the numbers again. It runs all the same calculations for every single one. And it basically says, okay, hit chance from the batter against this pitcher. Random number generator, you generate a random number. If greater than the hit chance, it's a hit. If not, it's not a hit. It basically just does that for every calculation. And it's pretty quick to do. It does not, like he says, it doesn't require you to generate a lot of data. All you need to really do is transfer the number from the server to your phone, and that is essentially the seed that will run the game. Now I can show you guys real quickly. So I've got the C++ thing in here. I should probably have done this beforehand. You know what's really funny is because I was typing on my keyboard, and I set my hotkey to record and stop recording with a normal keystroke and stop my recording. So we're going to go back to this. So I wanted to show you guys what I'm talking about in terms of value. And also I moved my camera because you couldn't see what I was doing. Okay, so we've got our C++ here. I just want to double check and make sure that you can actually see what I'm doing. I guess you can. Okay, cool. I also moved my camera a little bit too. So we're going to go into C++ here. I want to show you guys essentially what seeding the random number generator looks like, essentially. So let's include a couple things here. Standard lib. Oh god, why is this not working? Oh, that's because I'm stupid and I don't know how to type include correctly. Okay, so let's go ahead here and let's go do, let's see the random number generator, sran time null. So essentially what this is going to do is essentially going to see the random number generator at the current time, or I think it's time 0 at this point. I don't know, not time 0. I think time of null is essentially current time right now. So let's go, random number generator from 0 to 100, from 1 to 100, I think. It's 0 to 99. Alright, so let's go and let's see if I messed anything up here. Yes, I did, of course. I don't know how to spell namespace. Also, and semicolons are important. Also, it's a method. Oh my lord, I'm making all the mistakes today, but that's why we have it. All right, so we've got 5 random numbers from 1 to 99, or 0 to 100, I think it is. Let's go do 10 random numbers. 10 random numbers. And every time I run this program, it's going to be a little bit different. However, if I do... I hate naming things bad things. We'll do it just for the sake of time. For the sake of time, I just... Oh, God. I hate naming things like that. It's terrible. I want to be a proper programmer. If we do that, though, you can see it generates the same 5 numbers over and over again. But they're different every time. So how do you solve this? Well, if you instead change this to a long number, let's say, I don't know, let's say the current time is, we're 500 milliseconds in the universe. So we'll go 500 long. So the number generator using the 500L is this string right here. And as you can see, every single time I run this program, it is the same every single time. It will never change, because the random number generator has been seeded and will always give you the same exact results every single time. I can make this 250 times. This will run 250 times, and it will give you the same number every single time, and it will never change. Now, in C++, it's a little janky to kind of try to do this, so what I can do here is I can reload this, and I can go to Java, and I can kind of show you what I'm talking about in terms of, so I hate that. I hate that. All right, so let's go system. System.current time millis, and then it will show you the current system time in milliseconds, and this is the number of milliseconds since January 1st, 1970 at midnight. That is essentially where we're at. So that's how random number generator seeding works, and that is how you can basically know that it is a predictable outcome from a ranked system.
What proof do we have of this? How do we know this is actually happening? First of all, if you've initiated a ranked play game and your phone has aborted for some reason, or you've shut it down or whatever, at that stage, the random number has been generated, or the seed has been generated, and it's already been fed to your phone. So when you power back up your phone's going to know, oh, I had a game in process. And as many times as you try and shut that down, the outcome will always be the same, because the random number...
Make sure it's still recording. I'm worried now.
Therefore, the outcome is always the same. And COM2.
I think I noticed this right away as soon as they said this, because I said to myself, how does this system work? Because there's no way that this system just does this willy-nilly. How does the game give you results like this? It's because it's a deterministic outcome, but we don't know the outcome. I think that it's very difficult to say that this is one of vulnerability.
Saved it on their servers. When you fire that phone back up, they're not feeding you the results back down. In worst case scenario where you've lost that, they'll resend.
I think that this also gives you an interesting idea, which is the fact that you could say that Ranked and Master League Mode are run on different servers, essentially, because I would like to believe that in order to facilitate the Master League Mode, which is constantly in communication with the server, in order to stop that from clogging up the bandwidth of the actual server that's running Ranked and Club Battles, I would like to believe that that server is separate, due to the fact that Ranked doesn't really lag as much. Like he says that it would clog up the server if you were constantly making requests. So I think they're run on different servers, and that they are using different systems.
You the random number, and your phone will regenerate the results. How else do we know this? We know that if you were to imagine a game running, and all the processing and all the calculations of the batting outcomes and this type of stuff, if it attempted to communicate...
Well, I also do like to believe that most of what you're seeing in terms of batting outcomes are essentially just on the phone side. It's not necessarily a server side. The server side is just there to just facilitate the connection and make sure that nothing's gone wrong. A lot of the calculations are not run server side. The server is just merely there to catalog and to keep track of your results, essentially. But the phone calculations are very quickly. I mean, look, I'm gonna be honest with you. It's very, very quick to run calculations. It does not take a lot of power, but it's just there's a lot of data flowing in and out of the servers, essentially. But calculations are super quick. They do not require a lot of processing power.
communicate back and forth between the server and the game, all that was going on.
The way computers calculate numbers is way different than the way we calculate numbers, because essentially the game is doing it on a binary level, and it's a lot easier for it to it's a lot quicker for the server to do it than we are, because we're using our base 10 system is really janky in a lot of situations, especially with dividing things.
The amount of network traffic for one game would be immense, and now multiply that by thousands of users at the same time. The result simply would not scale. The game would.
Yeah, no, I don't think it would scale, but I also do like to believe that each system is on a different server at this point. Like Clubhouse is on its own server, Ranked is on its own server, Master League is on its own server, and then like the chat's on its own server essentially as well. So it's essentially using it like to break it apart and to basically keep it so that way that like the systems A don't interfere with each other, and B also don't negatively impact each other as well.
Not perform.
Let's go ahead a little bit. I think I've made my case here.
It leads to
so, and then we can talk about this stuff here. RNG is not truly random. True.
Possible vulnerability.
RNG is derived from a seed value. True. Can be reverse engineered. Also true. However, I would like to, like I said in the past, I believe it's a derived system. I do not believe that we will ever know this information. I believe it's a proprietary algorithm and formula. I don't think that we'll ever know, because that is a trade secret essentially. Like even more trade secret. Like this is a company that does not want to tell you the values of things and things that go on in the game on purpose, because they do not want anybody to get any insight on the way that their RNG machine works. Standard libraries are likely known formulas. True. That's probably why they're using proprietary formulas that are not publicly available. I don't know what cryptographically secure RNG is. I have no idea. I'm not familiar.
Or attempts hacking of this translates into, if you have and can provide a given set of quote cryptographically secure.
It's a tough word.
RNG.
I don't know what that is.
A possible avenue for.
Okay, so now we get to this point here, and now we're getting into the meat and potatoes of the back end.
So one quick thing before we jump into this on this topic of the random numbers. The most common seed that is used, or something that is used to generate the seed, is going to be a timestamp down to microseconds.
Millisecond, yes.
So typically, in order to first initiate your random numbered series, somebody's going to feed in something that is a timestamp or derived from a timestamp.
Yep.
And that, once again, will factor in when we take a look at something just a little bit later on here. But what I've done here is I've mapped out this really high level, and you could nitpick this apart if you wanted to, but
I don't have any
to
nitpick
give you a general idea of what we're doing, and I'm abstracting a lot of stuff.
It's a pretty good idea. I mean, this is honestly about right.
Apps on there, and it's going to be communicating to COM2 over the internet, over the network, and there's a lot of other stuff in between there, but all we care about is that there are messages going across.
Yeah.
It's eventually going to arrive at a data center containing this.
But the thing is that in a lot of these situations is that a lot of this information that is being trafficked is essentially going through HTTPS protocols. So essentially, it is very difficult to break into that. So I'll get into how you could possibly attack this system. But I mean, I don't quite know a lot of the back end, but I do have a good idea.
Handling this all, and then I've mapped out what I think are probably some likely parts of
the whole data center thing is up to debate. Like we have no idea.
A bunch of stuff working in conjunction with each other.
I think it's a lot of independent servers that are working conjunction, like together essentially. Like I said, like when you go to different game modes, you're playing on different servers essentially, and they're all just seamlessly communicating on the back end essentially and communicating back to you.
It's not going to be.
I think there's one game handler that is essentially calling on different servers to handle individual things and individual sectors of the game essentially. That's my theory.
A app per se, like you're used to on a phone, it's a singular thing. When you're talking about applications like this and games like this, it's a series or a bunch of collection of various services all doing different things to support the whole game behavior. So let's take a look at what a typical interaction with this might look like. So let's take a look at what engaging ranked play might look like.
So This is a good diagram. However, I would like to believe that here is the way that this is the way that I think the ranked system works. Is that number one is fine. It sends you press play, and then at that point the game sends a packet to the server to begin matchmaking. Essentially, at this point, and so that is the point when the ranked game begins, and that's when the server recognizes that is when its seeds are in a number generator. Essentially, it will pick an opponent, and then it will just send this data back to you as like a visual to show you what it is, and then it will essentially just like get all the information about the player's team, send it to you essentially, and send it back to you, and then it will run the ranked game on your phone itself. Like it will run the game on your phone, and then it will communicate then the final information back to the server at the end of it. All of this is encrypted, by the way,
in a series of steps. First of all, on the left-hand side, you would initiate a game from your phone or series of games from your phone, and that would essentially cause the phone to reach out to the server and say, hey, player wants to start a new game. So number two, the phone notifies the server, and on here, something I didn't cover in the last one, those little lines with the round circles at the end or round dots at the end, that's an endpoint. And what that means is, if you can imagine, there's a firewall where all the traffic going in there is ignored, but there's holes in the firewall that the application does listen through. That's what an endpoint is. So the phone's going to be talking to an endpoint on the server into the database, so that when you go and see how your team's performing, you can get it from seed.
Yeah, the stats provider is essentially like you just go into the server and you ask the server like, hey, can you give me the information on my team? And it'll essentially provide it for you, basically.
Through the game, it wants idea of what should.
Okay, so this is the one that I need to talk about here.
To get to the database.
So I would like to believe that there's a couple. Okay, so I don't think anybody's breaching the data center. No, not happening. That is not happening. That would be a massive, massive problem, because essentially, if you broke into their data center, you could essentially have access to high-level financial information on people, and I feel like that would be a massive, massive, massive issue. Like we're talking about a situation that would essentially tank the stock of a company at that point. That is probably not happening. Man-to-mill attacks, I don't believe are happening anymore. Because of the fact that you're running HTTPS certificates, I don't believe that you're really able to. And now, in the past, you used to be able to do some sniffing, and you used to be able to modify some packets while they're in flight. However, that's not really the case anymore, because, like I said, you're basically using a system with packets with certificates on them. Like, you can't really touch them in flight, because they're essentially encrypted data at that point. It's difficult to even listen. You need essentially a rooted device to listen to them at this point. So I do generally believe that is not the case. I think that the most likely situation that you're looking for here is a spoof, or like some kind of person that's going in and changing the code inside the app, which could be possible. You could always break into the application, and I'll talk about that in a second.
Do anything like that.
Yes, here we go. Logic is effectively a black box. Calculations are a black box. It's essentially, they're black boxes. That's essentially the way you're looking at things here.
You'd have to breach the data center first, and then affect the database. So that's not a small task. We'll talk about that in the next slide. And then finally, by being behind the firewall and having all the server code on the data center,
I don't think you're there.
It's going to behave largely like a black box. Or
I don't think you're breaking into the data center. I don't think we're breaking into the data center. Google Cloud, AWS. I don't think you're breaking into AWS. I'm sorry. I don't think anybody's doing that. It's one of the largest server providers in the world. I don't think you're breaking in there.
Actually, their whole thing, then they'll use that to, as they say, pivot. I can see how to.
I'm just gonna skip through this because I don't think this is likely.
I'm not gonna.
So this is the thing that I would like to talk about here, is that you could essentially use your phone as essentially an HTTPS certificate writer, essentially. If you could break into the game and then spoof the game, and then you could essentially be writing packets of data that are certified and then send them on the network, essentially. And that is the way I think that is being done here. They are doing something to modify the packets before they leave. Because once they leave, it's encrypted data. It is essentially like, if you've ever seen like the old letters, essentially like that you used to send in the old times, you used to write the letter, fold it up, you'd put the wax seal on it, and then you'd stamp it, essentially, and that is your, that is how it's a sealed letter, essentially, with a stamp on it to prove that it's been sealed, essentially. That's essentially what the HTTPS certificates do. Is essentially says that this is verified data. You don't need to worry about it because I verified it already, and it's good. Like, it has not been touched in transit because it's encrypted and they can't see it. So essentially, it's just a trusted way to send data.
Say this.
So I think that the way that you're doing it is essentially you're getting ahead of the schedule here, and you're essentially injecting your own malicious code into the app, and you're telling the app to send this malicious packet that is now essentially stamped and verified because it was sent from a trusted source.
Most impossible or difficult thing to do in the world. You could potentially be running the game. You could put it into some type of environment where you could take.
But I think this is also relevant for those game modes where you touch it and then you don't interact with the game at all. Now, maybe app hacks is more like speed hacks. Maybe that is the thing. But I think that there's more to do here than you think you would be able to do. So I want to go back to a game I used to play. This was probably about like 7 or 8 years ago, which was a game that was very similar. It was kind of like one of those games where you build your city and you go to other people's cities and you go battle them, and then you stuff like that. Essentially, what I found was that there was a security vulnerability in the game, where essentially that when you go and you refresh the rivals list that would appear, you could refresh the rivals list to go visit other people's cities. But essentially what it would do is essentially it would send a packet to the server and say, hey, please refresh the rivals list. And then it would send you a list of 10 friend codes as your rivals list. And then the server would essentially create a list of 10 people to visit based on their friend codes. Essentially what you could do is you could man-in-the-middle attack that packet. You could capture that packet, and then you could rewrite it by essentially using somebody on your friends list. You could copy their friend code off their friends list and then import it into that little space where it had the friends code of your opponent, and you could paste it in there. So essentially, if you had somebody on your friends list, you could take their friends code, place it in the packet, and then the server would be like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, I'll send you to that person's neighborhood. And then it would essentially create this situation where you could essentially go after anybody at any point in the game if you had their friend code, essentially. And that is the old days. It was an unencrypted packet. It was before HTTPS really kind of became commonplace, and it was just really, really bad code. And games have gotten much better now. That is no longer the case anymore. But that was a serious vulnerability in that game, and I was just happy to find it. I told them about it, but the game didn't last that long after that anyway, so they didn't really have a chance to fix it.
Keeping in memory that
I would like to tell you that I'm a white hat person. I'm not here to really be malicious with these things.
you could start manipulating things.
So essentially, what I was doing was a man-in-the-middle attack, but essentially what I'm saying here is that you could use the phone to manufacture a packet of data to send to the server. Hey, by the way, I beat this guy 85 to 36. Essentially, or like you change the number of runs when your phone sends back to the server and says, oh, by the way, I scored 80 runs, not 0. And essentially that's the way that it works.
You could manipulate them in such a way that the phone is the one that packages up the message and sends
yes,
it back to
that is the way
server.
I think that they were
Maybe
doing
get away
this.
with that. But as we pointed out, the reality with ranked play is that no matter what you do, you're not going to affect the game outcome.
But I think that the ranked games are being performed on your phone is the problem. Like, that is why the ranked game is happening on your phone. Your phone is the one that is executing the random numbers, not the server, I believe. I believe that the game is doing it, and then it will send a success, and then at the end of the game, then it will send to the server, say, hey, by the way, you can delete this seed on your server because here is the result that you have. That is essentially what I think it is doing. Is you are sending a malicious packet to the server, and the server is not checking the packet because the server says, this is an HTTPS packet, there's no way that anybody has messed with this packet in transit, and it's encrypted, so therefore, we don't need to check it. I would think that there'd be like a checksum on the packet, but apparently that's not the case, because otherwise they would be detecting this much more frequently. Like if you've ever seen like anybody play the game, and the packet gets damaged in transit, like either you have packet loss or something, and the server says malformed packet, that would tell you that the server has some sort of verification in place to determine what is a real packet. Essentially, the server is essentially like checking to make sure that the data, when it was encrypted, matches the data that it's still there now, essentially. So essentially, you write the packet, and then you write the packet in plain text. You do a checksum, so you run the packet through essentially an algorithm, like a SHA algorithm, like a 250, like not necessarily a SHA 256 algorithm. Like you're talking, like you're just basically like on your credit card, how the last digit on your credit card is a checksum to make sure that all the numbers make sense. So then you write that that number at the end of the packet, essentially, and then you encrypt the packet, and then you send it to the server. The server then decrypts the packet, and then like reads the data, runs the algorithm again to check the numbers, and then if it all checks out, then you're good. Then it says, okay, works for me. But the problem is that this falls down where is if your phone is the one writing the information and is writing fraudulent packets, then the checksum is defeated because it will write the checksum after, as it sends it, it will send the checksum. So that would be defeated, essentially. The checksum essentially defeats the man-in-the-middle, the packet decryption methods. But if your phone is the one writing the malicious packets, then this checksum is essentially worthless.
Because the game's already been handled on the server. So hacking the app is not going to do you any good for ranked play hacking. This is completely viable.
I disagree, though.
If you want to hack PvP,
I disagree.
Any other interactive ones, you can adjust your swings within the arcade mode, or you can intercept the message right before you get sent back and alter it to put in that you got a home run.
So this might be the weird one, but I believe that PvP, clutch, and arcade are. This is weird because I think that it's actually the opposite of what's being discussed here. I think PvP modes, clutch modes, arcade modes, I believe those are being run on the server essentially. You are essentially in a protected section of the server, and essentially the reason for that is that if you were playing a PvP game mode and you connected to somebody's device directly in PvP mode, essentially you have access to their network. Essentially, at that point, you have their information. You've essentially doxed them. So the server is essentially, you're running the PvP mode on the server, so that way you do not get their IP directly, essentially, because otherwise you could DDoS them. You could, get their location using an IP lookup. You could get server information. Like, I've seen people do some crazy things with IP data. You need to be very careful with that stuff. So the funny thing is I think the ranked modes are running on your phone, and I think that these game modes where you're interacting with the game live are on the server. Like, it is the opposite of what is being discussed here, honestly. But that's my opinion.
And then send that back to the server, and the server might accept it if you do it well enough. Okay, but with ranked play, this is there, and you're listening to all the network traffic, all the messages that are getting sent between your phone and the server. You can actually intercept.
So, like I said, in the example I gave, which was a man-in-the-middle attack, it was ARP poisoning, and you essentially had the server send back 10 friend codes, and then it would populate a list with 10 buttons, and it would essentially create a fake button on your game to go click the button and then say, like, I want to go to this person's city, and then it would click the button, and then it would essentially send the friend code you click to the server and say, go to that person's city, and that's how it would work, essentially. But I don't essentially you could do this with ranked. I believe you could. So there's two possible attack vectors here. Either you change scores, or you change the people who you matchmake with. And I think the matchmaking is done on server, so therefore it is not capable of being attacked, but I believe that the ranked scores that your phone is sending back to the server is what is being manipulated here.
You can actually watch those. Not only can you intercept them, but you can record them.
Either that, or they're changing, like, essentially the they're changing, like, the team somehow. I don't know. I can't really, like, think about anything else they would be doing. Essentially, they're playing like a weaker team that's not your team, essentially. It's really weird. I really can't explain it. Like, it's bizarre, to say the least, because, I mean, my explanation explains the scores, but doesn't explain the fact that these people have, like, crazy averages and crazy numbers. Like, I really can't explain those numbers, unfortunately.
So you can record all the communication, and armed with this, with the recording of the communication, you can attempt to reverse engineer and determine what messages are being sent, the purposes of those messages, the construction of those messages, and therefore you could potentially construct messages yourself.
Yes.
And send them to the server. So man in the middle means, oh, I'm listening to you give me this information from the server, and I'm either going to choose to pass it on, or I'm going to manipulate it and pass it on to the phone, or vice versa. Or more likely in this case, oh, okay, well, I hear you, the phone, are trying to start a ranked play game. Let me manipulate that network message a little bit before we send it on to the server.
Yes, essentially that's what's happening here. However, like I said, I believe that there's some sort of packet Like, I would believe that any company nowadays would have some sort of data verification on their packets to make sure that they're not being manipulated in traffic. And honestly, it's very difficult because you're essentially having to listen on HTTPS ports, which you need a security certificate to access. I don't think it's happening, to be honest with you. I don't think that this is a man-in-the-middle attack. I think that these are really weird attacks, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. I would like to believe that it's happening at the point of origin, which is your phone.
Now, in some cases, people can do this manually. They can pause the whole thing, they can intercept the message, they can modify it, and then they can send it along this way. Or they might write an app to do that, which is also less likely in this case, because once again, I really doubt somebody could put that level of investment into this. But this does require in-depth knowledge and a full understanding of exactly how the packages are constructed. And
this might surprise you, but it's actually very easy to run a man-in-the-middle attack. I mean, I used to basically run like can enable and essentially just ARP poisoning a network and essentially create a man-in-the-middle attack. Is essentially so the way I can give it to you the most plainly is essentially like imagine if you went into McDonald's and you connected to the McDonald's Wi-Fi and then you broadcast out a network from McDonald's Wi-Fi, and essentially now you are running a network in the middle. And that allows you to see all network traffic going from people's devices that are connected to your network, and then you're sending that network onto the server. That is essentially a man-in-the-middle attack. You are able to look at the data, which is at this point all encrypted data essentially, because we're running like HTTPS, and you need security certificates. It requires a lot of effort. A couple of years ago, the method was essentially certificate pinning, which was now deprecated, but now we're just on straight up security certificates, and it's very difficult. Like, essentially, every game you used to have to a game update, you essentially had to re-update your security certificates, and you have to like repin them. It was very frustrating for anybody trying to manipulate that stuff, and it's no longer the case now. But I think it's even more difficult now than it used to be because there was some security vulnerabilities in that system. And it was also very difficult for the devs to have to keep, sending out certificates to people.
Messages between the server and your phone are generally protected in some way. In some cases, they've encrypted it, so that even if you intercept it, you don't know what's in the message.
Yep.
You might actually hack the game this way. She would intercept things and manipulate them because they were sent via just normal HTTP messages. But anyway, getting a little bit too in-depth there. You could potentially do this. You could grab this, but if it's encrypted,
it's encrypted.
Tampered with.
I don't think you're doing it.
Spoofing is similar to man-in-the-middle in as much as it occurs within the network traffic and you're watching the messages.
You know what's crazy? It's like I use all of the same words that he uses, like a wax seal on an envelope. That was not intended.
You simply pretend to be
that was not intended at all.
Into the phone app, and you send messages on the phone app's behalf. So you don't necessarily take existing...
Yeah, and I think this is probably what they're doing. I think that they're doing this with a rooted device, and they're essentially breaking into the network, and essentially they're taking packets before they're being sent out across the network, essentially. I don't know how it's working, but I know for a fact that it is doing it. It's really funny, like, when I went to actually disassemble the APK one time, I found out that there's actually a system involved that's not encrypted on the app, that is actually visible, where... if you've ever seen the people that get banned for not paying, like essentially what happens is essentially like if you bought a Team Select Sig pack and you refunded it without their consent, that is actually a system that runs on the very top of the app. And I've seen this information that they can flag your account and stop you from logging in. Essentially, that is one of the few things that is actually not encrypted on this app.
And
very funny.
Them and modify them. You simply construct the messages yourself, and you pretend, and you send them on behalf of the phone, and pretend to be the phone.
Yeah, you're essentially pretending to be the phone.
This is easy, in a sense, because, like I mentioned with Man in the Middle, you could potentially record network traffic, and instead of modifying it, if the game is developed or built poorly enough and is vulnerable enough, you could potentially record network traffic and simply play it back and send it back to the server and get results. And
well, I mean that is true. However, servers nowadays are actually pretty good at detecting repeat packets. Servers are actually rather high tech in this regard. Is that if you send the same packet twice, it will see the second one and say, "Oh, nope, that's okay. I already have that data. No, thank you," and then it will just ignore it entirely. So essentially, if you send duplicate packets later on, it will essentially like you have to do it within a timestamp. Like a lot of these packets have a very limited lifespan timestamp wise, or else the server will just say, "No, thank you. That's old data. I'm okay, thanks," and then it will just ignore it. So I don't think you could really send old packets second time. The server was too good for that. Like it will notice, say, "Oh, by the way, I already have this data," or it will say, "That's old data. No, thank you."
This will go.
And a lot of these servers are like 30 seconds up to 60 seconds, essentially. That's the time frame window you're working for here.
Take a look at this in just a second when I take a guess as to what's happening right now with the game. But anyways, this is the least barrier of entry. It's probably the easiest one to do.
Yeah, I think you could achieve this with a rooted device, essentially.
It also, however, assumes that you can get past any type of encryption on any type of messages if it exists, and or if you could get past any type of checksums or message protection. You can think of message protection like a wax seal on an envelope. If somebody's passing a message, they put a wax seal. They want to know that the message wasn't tampered with. The wax seal is broken. Obviously, the message has been tampered. It can't be. So a checksum, which would be commonly used.
Yeah, a checksum would be what I would do.
Seal, and the checksum wouldn't necessarily break, but the contents of the message would become compromised, and the checksum would recognize that, and the server would then know somebody's tampered with this and not to pay attention to it.
Yeah, essentially the checksum works is if anybody has ever seen some kind of like good algorithms for encrypting data, like MD5 or like SHA-1, or like SHA-256, or like a higher version of that stuff, like you can get higher like 512 or stuff like that, but. If anybody has ever seen this, essentially what it does is it works like a waterfall, essentially. Like if you change one thing, even the slightest, if you have a message like "we attack at midnight," and then like you change one letter, essentially makes the ciphertext completely different. Essentially, that's what a good checksum should do. Is essentially if you change one little piece of data, the checksum is completely different, and it is not immediately obvious how the system functions. That's the way a good checksum should work. You can use message digests like SHA or MD5. PGP keys are a really good system of proving that something has been authored by the trusted person, but I think PGP keys are a little too large for this aspect. So I think a simple checksum, which essentially you run a hash on the packet and then generate a single or two-digit number to data verify, would be simple enough, and I think that would be fine.
So if COM2 is not,
because if you essentially change a final score from, like, let's say you win 4-3 and you change it to a 5-3 win, that essentially should change the checksum from like a 1 essentially to like a 17. Like it shouldn't be obvious. It should be very subtle, but it should be noticeable that there has been something that is amiss with what you're expecting. Like if you run the checksum on a message that says "we attack at midnight," and you then put the checksum at the end of the message, encrypt the whole message, send it off to the server, decrypt the message, and you find out that it says "we attack at sunrise," you run that message through the digest, and you run that to the algorithm. You check the two checksums that you end up with, which is the post and the one that was sent. You check them, and they're different. You don't trust the message, and you just say "no, thank you."
Implemented one of these two things, and there's a vulnerability right there in this. Yes, somebody could potentially hack this, but once again, I'm assuming that COM2 is not stupid.
I'm assuming they do have
standard
this.
Protections.
I'm assuming they do have this, unless they blindly trust HTTPS and they trust the certificates that they're not being messed with, that they don't have a checksum, which would, in my opinion, be incredibly stupid because it's such a basic security measure that I think that anybody should have it.
Of their messages in place. Otherwise, I would have expected to see any types of hacks like these way earlier. So, lower barrier of entry, possible to do, theoretically should not be possible if good protections are in place. So what is actually happening then?
Make sure we're still recording here. What is happening now? Many things.
So going back to what I stated earlier in the beginning of the slideshow, there's been a thread on Reddit about this, and I have taken a very hard stance that is not, nobody's hacking, that is virtually impossible, and that's why this video is being made. And yet, here we are. I'm making the video, and if you haven't had a chance to see, there's somebody sitting on top of the staged gameplay. There's something that really is happening. My belief is that if there's a...
No, I don't believe anybody's manipulating RNG. I believe that they're doing something in terms of, like I said, I believe that they're sending malformed packets that are changing the game's outcomes, essentially. But that doesn't necessarily explain why some teams are just so bananas. I think there's a twofold attack. I think some teams are essentially playing against that they're spoofing the teams they're playing against, essentially, or they're changing the data outcomes when they get up in the higher numbers, which is why you're seeing like 85 to 35 games, essentially. It happened to me last week in ranked. So I think what they're doing is they're basically manipulating the matchups so that way they're playing a weaker opponent, or they're changing the outcome of the game, and the server is trying to figure out what the hell happened or something. I don't really know. I cannot explain why and how the stats got there, and I can't explain it unless like they're playing a bunch of like really really weak teams constantly, and that they're basically changing it so that way they are playing weak teams all the time, essentially. Like they're manipulating matchups. I really don't know, but I think that the most likely idea here is that there's somebody with a rooted device has some way to change the data before it gets encrypted and sent to the server, essentially. That is my theory. Can't really back that information up, unfortunately, but that is my theory, and hopefully that we I don't know if there's anything else we need to really go over in this video.
And with different lineups,
I don't think you're using a favorable RNG seed. I don't know. There's absolutely no way you can know what the RNG seed is being used to do. Honestly, I think that that's all just stuff that is, we have no idea what that means. So I don't think that that's the answer. I don't think you can exploit RNG. There is RNG manipulation in games, but that is when you have a known RNG formula. Like if you've ever seen in Pokemon games, like that RNG manipulation is like a staple of speedrunning in those games. But really that's because the Nintendo DS essentially has a finite RNG like table, whereas computers don't, and you could be using a completely different RNG service that we don't even have access to because it's proprietary. Anyway, let's see what the end of this video is.
If you so game for me, I want to play a ranked game. Please generate it for me. If Com2 blindly takes the timestamp and uses that, that's a vulnerability. If they're not protecting their messages and encrypting them,
But they are.
somebody could be manipulating them and spoofing them. And then finally, if they don't have some type of checksum or wax seal on the messages, that's another possibility that somebody could be tampering with the messages. All these things make it very difficult, so I'm going to be very interested in seeing what Com2's reply is going to be.
I'm gonna stop you there. Their reply is going to be nothing. Their reply is going to be silence, and they do not want to admit that this is a problem. They will continue to quietly ban these people because, let's be honest here, the people who are doing this are such a minor sect at this point that, like, maybe you might run into 1 to 3 accounts that are doing this per week. They're not really impacting the overall game at this point, in my opinion. It's not really like a huge widespread problem. Until they really start making an impact on really like the top end of the game, I don't really think that this is a problem at this point. I think it's a problem for the long-term viability of the game if the ways and methods that they do this get out. However, right now I believe that right now it's really just kind of, you know, it's a hot topic issue because it's so in everybody's faces right now. But I think that I've covered everything I want to say about this video. I hope you guys enjoyed getting to like sit here and chat with me for a little while. I thought this was a very interesting topic because there is something absolutely going on here, and I can't really pin it down myself, but it is absolutely happening. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you guys think. If you guys want me to do any more videos like this or use some more facecam videos, do let me know in the comment section below. But I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, good luck with your packs, your pulls, your combos, and hopefully this guy or whoever's doing this gets banned off the game as soon as possible and that they fix this whatever is going on. Anyway, peace.